Before the first light of dawn had fully broken, I was already awake, my mind still half in the realm of dreams as I sipped my first cup of coffee. That morning, however, nothing was normal. I stepped outside to inspect my property, only to be greeted by an alarming sight. My carefully installed solar panels, which had powered my entire farm for years, were shattered into jagged pieces. The panels, once gleaming in the early sunlight, lay in ruins, their fractured surfaces glinting like broken promises. I immediately suspected foul play. Rumors had been swirling for weeks about HOA Karen's latest crusade against any sign of nonconformity. Known for her obsessive enforcement of community rules, she had a reputation for meddling in everyone's business, often taking matters into her own hands. And now, as I examined the debris scattered across my rooftop, my heart pounded with a mix of disbelief and fury. Somehow, the very person who prided herself on preserving the pristine order of our neighborhood had targeted my solar panels, an eco-friendly symbol of independence and progress. I checked the security footage from the previous night. The video was grainy but unmistakable, a figure in a dark hoodie, unmistakably Karen, creeping along the edge of my property and tampering with the wiring that connected my panels. She seemed determined, methodical, even as she left a trail of destruction in her wake. It wasn't just vandalism. It was an act of pure, petty malice designed to force me into compliance with a rigid vision of what our community should be. A surge of determination welled up inside me. I had spent years investing in renewable energy, believing in a future where our resources were harnessed responsibly. Now, with my solar panels destroyed, I realized that Karen wasn't content with simply enforcing outdated aesthetic rules. She was intent on sabotaging progress. And I wasn't about to let her win. I decided then that if Karen wanted to play dirty, I would hit back even harder. I'd show her, and everyone else, that I wasn't just a victim. I was a fighter, and I had the means to retaliate. I hatched a plan. I would shut down the HOA's power grid, a grid that fueled their fancy community center and their well-manicured common areas, thereby forcing them to face the consequences of their own overreach. As the dawn broke fully over my shattered solar array, I resolved that today, Karen's abuse of power would finally be met with an electrifying dose of justice. Redwood Acres was a sprawling, independent farm that I had inherited from my family, a patch of land where nature and modern innovation coexisted. Far removed from the cookie-cutter neighborhoods of the city, my farm was a testament to generations of hard work, ingenuity, and a steadfast belief in self-reliance. Rows of crops, grazing pastures, and a state-of-the-art solar array powered nearly every corner of the property. I'd invested in renewable energy with a vision to run my farm sustainably and inspire others to embrace green technology. But just a few miles away lay the prestigious Oakwood Estates, a neighborhood meticulously managed by a rigid homeowners association, HOA. In Oakwood Estates, conformity was king. Every house was identical, every lawn immaculately trimmed, and every deviation from the norm was met with swift, often draconian, action. The HOA's enforcer, Karen Baxter, known by everyone simply as HOA Karen, was the self-appointed guardian of the community's pristine image. With her impeccably tailored suits, perfectly coiffed hair, and a clipboard always at the ready, she patrolled the streets like a hawk, scrutinizing every minor infraction. Karen's influence extended well beyond her own property. She had built a reputation for reporting even the slightest hint of disorder, be it an overgrown hedge or a mismatched mailbox, and many residents trembled at the thought of drawing her ire. To Karen, our community was a work of art that demanded perfection, and she was its unwavering curator. I, on the other hand, had always championed the idea that innovation and individuality were the true marks of progress. My solar panels weren't just expensive gadgets. They were a symbol of my commitment to a sustainable future, a bold statement in a world increasingly dominated by fossil fuels. They represented years of hard work, cutting-edge research, and the hope of a better tomorrow, a hope that was shattered the moment Karen's vandalism rendered them useless. The contrast between the free-spirited independence of Redwood Acres and the suffocating uniformity of Oakwood Estates couldn't have been starker. While the residents of Oakwood Estates dutifully followed the HOA's every rule, I had always prided myself on blazing my own trail, both in farming and in life. My farm was a living canvas where I experimented with eco-friendly techniques and where every innovation was a testament to our right to self-determination. When I discovered that my solar panels had been destroyed, I knew I was facing more than just a personal loss. I was confronting an institution that sought to control and suppress progress. The HOA's decision to take matters into their own hands, by letting their enforcer, Karen, act as judge, jury, and executioner, was an affront to everything I stood for. It wasn't just about aesthetics or property values. It was about the right to innovate, to harness renewable energy, and to shape one's own destiny. I also knew that if Karen had the audacity to sabotage my farm's power supply, she must be held accountable, and I had the means to do so. I had spent years building an efficient, interconnected energy system that not only powered my operations, but also connected to the broader network that served parts of Oakwood Estates. That network, managed by the HOA, was a critical resource for the community. And now, if Karen thought she could steal from me without consequences, she would soon learn that there are limits to her overreach. Thus, with the bitter taste of betrayal fresh in my mouth and a fierce resolve burning in my heart, I began to plan my retaliation, a plan that would not only restore my power, but also send a resounding message to anyone who dared to infringe upon my rights. The first signs of the theft came during the dead of night. I had been alerted by the subtle flicker of my power meter and by discrepancies in my energy logs that I had meticulously maintained. At first, I suspected technical glitches, perhaps a temporary malfunction in one of my inverters or an unexpected surge. But when I cross-referenced the logs with the time-stamped footage from my security cameras, the truth became undeniable. There in the dark was Karen Baxter, her figure illuminated by the glow of her phone as she snuck onto my property. I watched in disbelief as she connected an extension cord to the junction box that fed my solar panels and rerouted my precious energy into her own home circuit. The audacity of it all was staggering. I had invested everything in my renewable energy system, spending countless hours and dollars ensuring that my farm was not only self-sufficient, but also a model of green innovation. And now, Karen Baxter, a woman who prided herself on enforcing community standards, was caught red-handed, exploiting my hard-won energy for her own benefit. The evidence was irrefutable. Every night at approximately 2 a.m., my energy logs recorded a significant drop, and the security footage confirmed her every move. Fury surged through me as I gathered the evidence. Screenshots of the tampered energy logs, clear video clips of her nocturnal misdeeds, and even expert analysis from a local electrical engineer who confirmed that the stolen energy was diverting into a non-registered circuit. I compiled a dossier that detailed every incident, leaving no room for doubt. This wasn't a technical error. It was theft, plain and simple. I promptly presented the dossier to the HOA board, demanding that they take immediate action against Karen for her blatant abuse of power. My complaint was met with dismissive murmurs at first. Karen's reputation had long shielded her from criticism. The board tried to downplay the issue, arguing that minor energy fluctuations were normal and that there was no conclusive evidence of theft. But I wasn't deterred. I knew what I had seen, and the digital evidence was overwhelming. Determined to fight back, I devised a plan that would turn the tables. If Karen had the nerve to steal my energy, I would make her pay, both literally and figuratively. I decided that the best way to retaliate was to issue a fake HOA fine, a staggering $10,000 bill for unauthorized power usage and violation of community energy conservation standards. I spent hours designing the document, complete with official letterhead, legal-sounding citations, and an itemized breakdown of damages caused by her pilfering. The fine was a symbolic act of retribution, a way to force the HOA board and the community to confront the reality of her abuse. But my plan didn't stop there. I realized that if I could disrupt her power supply in return, it would send a clear message. My farm's energy system wasn't isolated. It was connected to a broader network that, according to outdated contracts, also served parts of Oakwood Estates, including the HOA office and Karen's own home. After confirming the technical details, I planned to cut off her supply by remotely shutting down specific valves and breakers that controlled her portion of the grid. This would leave her in the dark, literally, and force her to experience the consequences of her own actions. Late one night, under the cover of darkness and with all my preparations in place, I executed my plan. I accessed the remote control panel for my energy system, verified the circuit mappings, and flipped the necessary switches. In a matter of minutes, my meticulously maintained power grid rerouted the flow away from Karen's property, leaving her with a blackout that was as sudden as it was complete. The next morning, as the sun rose over Red River Acres, chaos erupted. Neighbors reported that their power had flickered and then cut out entirely in the vicinity of Karen's house. Phones rang off the hook with frantic calls to the utility company, and soon the community was buzzing with speculation and outrage. I took to my social media channels to post the digital fine, along with excerpts of the security footage and energy logs. The hashtag electric justice began trending locally, and supportive messages poured in from neighbors who had grown tired of the HOA's unchecked authority. Karen's reaction was swift and furious. I caught a live video of her on her front porch, red-faced and shaking as she demanded an explanation for the blackout. "This is outrageous. I demand that the HOA fix this immediately," she shouted, her voice cracking with indignation. But the evidence was already undeniable. My digital dossier, the fake fine, and the blackout had all converged to expose her abuse of power. Every shared video clip, every hashtag, and every supportive comment reinforced the growing movement against arbitrary rule enforcement. My actions had not only reclaimed what was rightfully mine, but had also ignited a community-wide uprising against the HOA's tyranny. It was clear that the days of Karen Baxter pilfering from my property, and from any property, were numbered. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation that would force the HOA board to address these abuses once and for all. In the days following the blackout, the story of my retaliation spread like wildfire throughout Oakwood Meadows. Social media platforms erupted with shared videos of the blackout, screenshots of my meticulously compiled energy logs, and the official-looking digital fine that demanded $10,000 for unauthorized power usage. Hashtags like hashtag electric justice, hashtag power thief, and hashtag Norwich Eveline quickly trended as residents, who had long been frustrated by the HOA's arbitrary actions, found their voices and rallied behind me. Local news stations were quick to pick up the story. Reporters drove by the now-darkened neighborhood near Karen Baxter's home and interviewed residents who were both amused and outraged by the spectacle. "It's incredible," one anchor remarked, "that a farmer could turn the tables on an overzealous HOA enforcer by cutting off her power." The narrative shifted from a simple case of energy theft to a broader commentary on property rights, community governance, and the abuse of power by those who claim to uphold neighborhood standards. Within the HOA board, divisions that had long simmered beneath the surface began to boil over. Emergency meetings were convened behind closed doors, and leaked minutes revealed heated arguments among board members. Some members, swayed by the overwhelming digital evidence and the strong public sentiment, argued that Karen Baxter's actions had not only violated ethical standards, but had undermined the very foundation of property rights in Oakwood Meadows. "We must stand for justice and fairness," one board member was heard saying, "or we risk becoming a tool for petty vendettas." Others clung to the old guard, insisting that rules were rules and that any deviation, no matter how trivial, needed to be punished. But the tide of public opinion was undeniable. The digital records of Karen's repeated abuses, now combined with the dramatic blackout, had left the board with little choice. I found myself inundated with messages from neighbors who recounted their own experiences with arbitrary fines and intrusive inspections. Online petitions demanding that the HOA board launch a full investigation into Karen's practices rapidly amassed thousands of signatures. The collective voice of the community grew louder every day, and every shared post reinforced the idea that individual property rights should never be compromised by bureaucratic overreach. The local police department also got involved. In a press conference, Officer Aaron Lewis stated, "When digital evidence demonstrates clear abuse of power, especially involving the theft of private resources, it is our duty to ensure that justice is served. We urge all residents to report any further instances of such behavior, as it undermines the trust we all have in our local institutions." His measured tone added an official endorsement to the movement, further pressuring the HOA board to act. As days turned into a week, the energy in the community was electric. Town hall meetings became impassioned forums where residents discussed not just my case, but the broader implications of allowing individuals like Karen Baxter to enforce rules based on personal bias. At one particularly charged meeting, a longtime resident stood up and declared, "This isn't just about stolen electricity. It's about our right to control our own property without being bullied by those who abuse their power." The applause that followed was thunderous, and it signaled that the community was ready for change. Amid the escalating tensions, I continued to document every development. I posted live updates on my social media channels, sharing video clips of the blackout's aftermath, screenshots of the energy logs, and even excerpts of the digital fine. Each post was a call to action, a rallying cry that resonated with countless residents who had long felt oppressed by the HOA's draconian policies. The hashtag electric justice became a symbol of our collective resistance, a reminder that when we stand together, even the most entrenched abuse of power can be overcome. Finally, the HOA board announced that a final public hearing would be held to address the controversy and determine the future course of action regarding Karen Baxter's conduct. The announcement sent shockwaves through Oakwood Meadows. In the days leading up to the hearing, online petitions and community forums buzzed with anticipation. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown, a moment when the collective voice of every resident would force the board to confront the undeniable truth: property rights and individual freedom must come before petty rule enforcement. The decisive moment came on a crisp morning in a packed boardroom at the Oakwood Meadows Community Center. The room was filled with HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and an impassioned assembly of residents, all gathered to witness the final vote that would determine the fate of our neighborhood's enforcement policies. With a calm, yet steely demeanor, Councilwoman Denise Parker stepped up to the podium, her eyes reflecting the hope and determination of a community that had had enough. After an exhaustive review of all digital evidence, including security footage, power usage logs, and the countless testimonies of our residents, we have reached an incontrovertible conclusion. Councilwoman Parker began, her voice clear and resolute. It is evident that the actions taken by Mrs. Karen Baxter, specifically the unauthorized siphoning of electricity from private property and her repeated exploitation of our community's resources, were not only baseless but driven by personal bias and a gross abuse of power. This incident is a stark reminder that no one, regardless of their self-appointed authority, is above the law. A heavy silence fell over the room as Parker continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all fines and sanctions related to these violations and initiate a full disciplinary review of the practices that allowed such overreach. Furthermore, we will implement new guidelines that protect the property rights of every resident in Oakwood Meadows. Today's decision is not merely about reversing a fine. It is a declaration that our community will no longer tolerate the abuse of power for personal gain. Her words resonated deeply, and murmurs of approval rippled through the assembly. At that moment, a longtime community advocate, renowned for his unwavering commitment to property rights, rose to speak. "Today, we stand united as one," he declared, his voice ringing with passion. "No resident should ever have to endure the tyranny of arbitrary enforcement. Let this vote be the turning point, a clear signal that Oakwood Meadows will defend the sanctity of private property and hold those who abuse power fully accountable. We demand justice, and we will not rest until every violation is rectified." His declaration was met with a thunderous round of applause that echoed throughout the room. Following his speech, a senior officer from the local police department presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of all digital evidence, including time-stamped security footage of Karen Baxter's intrusions and detailed power logs that documented every unauthorized what's stolen from my farm. The evidence was irrefutable. The Internal Affairs panel had unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary measures against those responsible for this flagrant abuse of power, and the full report was scheduled for immediate public release. Councilwoman Parker concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Oakwood Meadows, a community where individual rights are sacrosanct and public authority is exercised with integrity." Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will protect our freedoms and that we will no longer allow petty vendettas to dictate our lives. Together, we stand for justice, accountability, and the inalienable right to control our own resources. Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our battle for property rights. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom reflected shock, determination, and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of our community had forced a decisive action that would forever reshape the governance of Oakwood Meadows. The days of petty, arbitrary enforcement were over, and a future built on respect for individual rights was finally within our grasp. In the weeks that followed the historic vote, Oakwood Meadows underwent a profound transformation. News of the rescinded fines and the sweeping reforms enacted by the HOA board spread rapidly throughout local media and on social networks, igniting spirited discussions about property rights, accountability, and the proper use of community resources. Editorials in the local paper, with headlines like "A New Dawn for Oakwood Meadows" and "Community United for Freedom," celebrated the decisive actions taken to protect individual rights. Hashtags such as #PropertyRights, #NoMoreHOBullying, and #ElectricJustice trended widely, reinforcing our community's steadfast commitment to holding power accountable. Town hall meetings and community forums saw record attendance as residents gathered to share their experiences and to envision a future free from arbitrary rule enforcement. Neighbors who had long felt suppressed by invasive HOA policies now spoke openly about their right to manage their own property and express their individuality without fear. Our farms, our homes, they're our sanctuaries, not public utilities to be exploited by a handful of overzealous enforcers, one resident declared at a bustling meeting, his voice imbued with hope and defiance. Within the reformed HOA board and the local police department, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, launched comprehensive training programs on ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and the responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and a transparent disciplinary process were established, ensuring that every complaint would be thoroughly scrutinized and that no resident would ever again be subject to arbitrary fines or unwarranted interference. Our duty is to protect the rights and freedoms of every member of our community, Lieutenant Reed proclaimed in a follow-up press conference, reaffirming the new commitment to justice and fairness. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations also mobilized to ensure that the lessons of this episode would lead to lasting change. Workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns were organized to empower residents and to highlight the importance of property rights and personal freedom. When we stand together, no one can strip away our rights, a local activist passionately declared at a town hall meeting, inspiring countless residents to join the movement for reform. For me, the journey from confrontation to resolution was both deeply personal and profoundly transformative. My decision to retaliate against Karen Baxter by shutting down her power supply and issuing a $10,000 fake HOA fine had not only reclaimed my farm's resources, but had ignited a broader movement that resonated throughout Oakwood Meadows. Neighbors who had once suffered in silence now shared their own stories of injustice, and together we formed a united front against bureaucratic overreach. The digital evidence that exposed Karen's misdeeds became a beacon of hope and a rallying cry for every resident who believed that property rights were sacred. Karen Baxter, once the unchallenged enforcer of the HOA's arbitrary rules, was now a cautionary tale. Her past transgressions, meticulously documented and circulated online, were a stark reminder that no one is above accountability when a community stands united. Her influence waned rapidly, and she soon became synonymous with the dangers of unchecked power. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Oakwood Meadows, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered under the fading light of a setting sun. A large banner reading "Unity, Freedom, and Property Rights" was unfurled between towering oak trees, and heartfelt speeches echoed with promises of a brighter, more inclusive future. Today, we celebrate the victory of our rights over arbitrary authority, Councilwoman Parker proclaimed, her voice resonating with determination. The standing ovation that followed was a powerful affirmation of our collective commitment to defend our freedoms and to ensure that no one can abuse public power again. As each new day dawned over Oakwood Meadows, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of transformative change. The story of how HOA Karen Baxter's audacious theft of my farm's electricity was exposed, and how I retaliated by shutting down her power grid and issuing a fake fine that forced her to pay thousands, became a rallying cry for every resident who believed in the sanctity of private property and individual freedom. Every sunrise now carried the promise that in Oakwood Meadows, truth, justice, and personal liberty would forever prevail. In the end, what began as a personal battle evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Oakwood Meadows would forever be a place where freedom, integrity, and respect for individual property were cherished above all else.